Be interesting to see if we have a rush on people at about 10 to 10. Do you ever wonder why you act the way you act? That may sound like a very simple question, but if you really think about it, it's not. People act for all sorts of reasons, from all different kinds of motives. Some motives are really admirable, some not so much. Some motive drives us to do the right thing, and some motives drive us to do the wrong thing. Some lead us in healthy directions, and some get us into all sorts of trouble. Put simply, human behavior is complicated. It's really complicated. It's one of the main reasons why we shouldn't really rush to judgment when looking at the behavior of others, that we shouldn't presume we know why someone is acting the way they do. I think about these things often, especially during this holy season of Lent. And while I think about my actions themselves, what I do or what I don't do, I usually try to take one step back and think about the why behind the what. Why do I do the things I do? Why do I mess up again and again and again? Well, I know that sometimes I act out of anger. Sometimes I act out of selfishness. Sometimes I act out of laziness. Sometimes I act out of prejudice. Sometimes I act out of frustrations. Sometimes I act out of greed. Sometimes I act out of fear. The list could go on and on and on, unfortunately. So many motives, and not one I mentioned is something that I'm proud of. Do you ever feel the same way? Do you often act for those same reasons, from those same motives? Probably. Men and women have been acting out of these sorts of motives for a very long time. But what about the good stuff? The kind things that we do, the acts of generosity or mercy or compassion? What about the lonely person that we befriend, or the money we donate to charity, or the care we give our elderly parents or grandparents, or the various groups that we volunteer for? What are our motives for doing those sort of things? Are these motives the motives for doing good completely admirable, or might they be lacking too? As you well know, one of the things we are asked to focus on during Lent is our faithfulness or lack thereof to God. We are invited to look deep within our hearts, invited to take a difficult and honest and long look at our own behaviors, our own attitudes, our own thoughts and words, our own sins. And it's not easy. It's downright painful at times to bring out into the light some of the things we would rather keep buried in the darkness. It's hard to admit how we fall so far short of being the people that God created us to be. But it's truly necessary if we want to be healed, to be mended, to be made whole again. We have to bring it to the light. A doctor can't cure a patient until the doctor knows what's wrong with the patient. And God can't, by his own choice, change us from within unless we admit to God that there is something within us that needs to be fixed in the first place. The alcoholic remains an alcoholic until he admits he has a problem. And so, understanding our motives, the reasons behind our actions, is essential to living a life of faith. Why should I, or do I, strive to avoid bad things, and why should I, or do I, strive to do good things? Maybe those questions sound ridiculous, or maybe the answers to those questions seem incredibly obvious to you. So God doesn't get mad at me? So God will answer my prayers? So God will stop punishing me? So that God will reward me? So that God won't send me to hell? Or better yet, just in case there's a God. There's a part of me that wonders if I don't often act for those exact same reasons. Oh, maybe I'd couch it in slightly softer language. Maybe I tried to spin it slightly differently. Or maybe I'd even deny it if I was forced to talk about it. But my guess is these sorts of motives are present in many of us. Maybe not all the time, but some of the time and in certain circumstances. Do I really act the way I act to get God to be nice to me, to bless me, to care about me, to not pounce on me? Do I really act the way I do so that God will love me? In today's first reading from Deuteronomy, we see Moses instructing the people to give an offering to God, not just any offering, but the offering of their produce from their soil. And these aren't just the leftovers. No, they are what we refer to as the first fruits, the first produce to be gathered from their harvest. And we know that the first fruits are the best of the crop. And Moses makes it clear why they are to do this. Not so that God will bless them, not so that God will care about them, not so that God will love them, but rather because God has already loved them. And they simply are responding in love to the one who has loved them first, the God who rescued them from bondage in Egypt and brought them into the promised land. If only we could do the same. I think, friends, the reason we don't is we fail to forget what God has done for us and is doing for us and will be doing for us. Unfortunately, many of us think and sit back thinking we're doing all of this on our own. We believe that we're so rich and so blessed from our own efforts and not recognizing it's God's almighty hand upon us. If we think we're doing it all, that we're earning our salary because we're working those 40 hours and God has nothing to do with it, we are deceiving ourselves. We are making ourselves believe that all we're doing is all us and that God has nothing to do with it. A great lie that we enter into. That lie, that deception, that Satan lures us to believe that it's all us and that God has nothing to do with it. And unfortunately, we might even believe the same thing when it comes to our salvation, that we'll get to heaven by the sweat of our brow. And the truth of the matter is, you could stay in this church every single moment for the rest of your lives, and there's no guarantee you will get into heaven. God is the one who offers us that gift. It is not our actions. It is not our sacrifices. It is not our ability to get ourselves into heaven. If that were the case, we would all still be Jews. There would not have been a reason for a Savior if we didn't need one. Friends, Lent calls us to reflect. Lent calls us to examine what are our motives. Our motives should be one of gratitude, one responding for all that God is doing for us and will continue to do for us. If only we could do every good thing and avoid every bad thing, not so that God will love us, but because we recognize just how much he loves us already. Not once in a while, not only if we get everything right, but even when we mess up. That's the awesome God that we have. May the changes that we seek in our hearts and minds and actions this Lent not be a desperate cry to be loved, but rather be a celebration of and a response to the one who is love.